Yo. Okay.
Yo. It's showtime. Can you watch the wasted glory?
First made a giggle, no tickle. Then made a tickle my tongue. Metal on me like a nickel. Ice on me turn like a sickle.
Neutral. The stage of a fight where neither player is blocking or getting hit by anything, and you're trying to figure out the best way to start or continue your game plan. Footsies. A complicated, often nebulous term that refers to the battle for controlling the space in front of you, often by using good pokes. In essence, you're trying to get to a range you like, while trying to deny your opponent getting to a range that they like. A wise man once said, footsies are a part of neutral, but not all neutral has footsies. Even in a neutral, there's an unspoken rule that enforces rock, paper, scissors-like decision-making when fishing for an advantage. This subtle phenomenon is usually what can define matchups, since there are a myriad of tools that exist among different characters, defining their archetypes. But you could say that in the case of Blanka, we define him as, well, weird. Alright, Blanka isn't all that weird. Sure, he likes to do the funny Blanka thing with his Blanka balls, surprise attacks like Amazon River Run and Wild Hunt, throwing out Blanka-chan dolls, etc, etc. But in order for these dynamic tools to be sharpened for consistency in battle, you have to understand his neutral. Alright, let's start small. Blanka, by design, is a high-risk, high-reward character who excels in mobility and trickiness to confuse and overwhelm his opponent. The goal is simple: be as annoying as humanly possible. Depending on your opponent, results may vary, on both ends. Sometimes you have to play slow, and other times you'll have to turn up the heat with aggression. Knowing how to switch between the two will only better your element of surprise in the neutral. Now, there's a really good video explained in layman's terms by content creator Krakatoa, where he summarizes what's called the 3 structure, a concept of neutral documented and described in full by top Guilty Gear player Machabo. I'll link both the article and summary video in the description. Basically, it goes like this. There's passive play, establishing play, and preemptive play. When playing passive, you're usually functioning at a slower and reactive pace to shut down your opponent's various options. This becomes easier at moderately safer ranges if your opponent is just fishing for hits using their own tools. But it gets harder when the gap is too close. Enter establishing play. Well, someone has to make a move to get the party started, right? If a player has access to moves within an effective range that benefits them, whether it be zoning, rushdown, or otherwise, they can establish set attacks to force a response from their opponent, who is looking for opportunities to win neutral. Sometimes those attacks are reactable, sometimes not so much. So what can you do? Well, if you have an assumption, or read, that your opponent will try to establish a play in the neutral, you can go for a counter that's necessary for discouraging the option to be seen again, therefore attempting to maintain the neutral in your favor. We call this preemptive play. Now, remember what I said about that unspoken rule of RPS and neutral? Well, if you're the one playing preemptive trying to shut down what's perceived as an assumption of established play, and the player pulls back their punches in that moment, then guess what? You're now losing to passive play. This neutral triangle is always being cycled whenever there is no Oki or pressure being applied, and both characters have an opportunity to overthrow the other. Whether you like it or not, this is neutral. Alright, now with that out the way, let's go over Blanka's neutral. The ranges that you're going to want to reserve for setting up different plays is entirely dependent on the scenario, if not the matchup itself. When playing passive and fighting against a character who is on par with their tier of buttons, focusing on footsies is an option in the playbook. Again, where you position yourself will depend on the matchup, but in the context of footsies, you'll usually find yourself anywhere from within crouch medium punch range to outside of crouch heavy punch range. You won't need to depend on charge too much if you have drive meter to spare, while also capitalizing on an opponent whiffing with crouch medium punch DRC cancels, stand medium punch into SA1 or SA3, or punishing wider whiffs with crouch heavy punch or crouch heavy kick for Oki opportunities. It's also worth noting that if you're sitting on a huge life lead, most of the time you're better off just relying on your grounded light attacks to control the screen and allow the opponent to establish in areas where your mental stack won't be as cluttered. Now let's say you're the one establishing to get the party started. Well, one good thing about SF6 is that every character has access to at least one establishing tool. That's right, Drive Rush. Obviously, some Drive Rushes are better than others. His Drive Rush is very underrated for what it can accomplish in neutral. Drive Rush Stand Heavy Kick is basically a giant wall being flung at the opponent, making it hard to check with regular normals. You also have a bunch of special moves to test the opponent's defensive tendencies like Blanka Ball, Rainbow Ball, Surprise Hop, Amazon River Run, and Wild Hunt. You don't want to go too ham with these techniques, however, as all of these tools can be considered very risky on paper. But when used correctly, these tools can overwhelm even the sharpest of defense. Blanka being preemptive with his neutral plays also depends entirely on the matchup and what scenario he finds himself in. This includes jumping or sliding under a fireball as a read, anti-airing certain establishing air approaches, or even shutting down potential momentum shifts during a sequence. Just keep in mind the type of risk you're implying at certain levels of play, as this can sometimes be seen as establishing to the opponent who's already prepared to counter. So why is this all important? Well, like Krakatoa said in his video, it's important to understand the variables and how neutral is presented from both players. How you adapt to the situation won't always be the same when fighting another player, and that's what makes the concept of neutral so interesting. It's like a small conversation between two people, in the form of a dance, playing chess, yelling and screaming at each other. I don't know. It's also important to keep in mind that since this is essentially RPS coded, you should understand when to keep playing the same hand versus when to switch it up. Newer players usually struggle when adapting on the fly, while seasoned players will not only adapt quicker, but can also fool you into a mental trap of their own, testing the high level waters. You guys are both playing the same game after all. So to summarize, footsies are a part of neutral, but not all neutral has footsies. Neutral has RPS elements of its own, and it's necessary to understand what beats what. Passive beats preemptive, establishing beats passive, preemptive beats establishing. Note, due to matchup variables, results may vary. Blanka is high risk, high reward by nature, and sometimes has to establish in ways that baits the passive opponent. Just don't be too predictable. You'll be fine. Alright y'all, and that's it for the video. Holy shit. Alright y'all, that's it for the video. If you like what you saw, make sure to rock, paper, scissors that like button, consider subscribing, comment, all that good stuff, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Y'all take it easy.